Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. What if China ruled? What if China were a military superpower on par with the United States? What kind of world would we live in? Would China put into check Washington's appetite for unilateral military action and manipulation of the global economy? Or would we witness another Cold War where both Beijing and Washington maintained a chilly, though relatively peaceful, world? To CrossTalk China's Rise, I'm joined by Lianchao Han in Washington. He is a visiting fellow at the Hudson Institute. We also have Dan Botz in Cincinnati. He's a co-editor of New Politics, a journal of socialist thought. And in Philadelphia, we cross to Linh Dinh. He is a political commentator and writer for Counterpunch. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Lynn, if I go to you first in Philadelphia, what would the world look like today if China were the same military had the same military strength as the United States? You know, on par.
It won't be a Cold War. I think it will be a series of wars by proxies because both countries need quite a bit of energy, quite a bit of oil, natural gas to survive. And since we have passed the point of cheap oil and cheap energy, these countries will have to jockey each other out of the way, and they will fight each other, frankly. It is already happening, and it will only intensify in the future. And this is not necessarily China's fault because it has to do this to survive. It needs to import half of its food, for example. It's depending on so much from the outside to survive. So it must fight for survival. So, and the U.S. will also defend its status. So it won't be a Cold War. It will be a series of hot wars, if not outright direct confrontation between these two powers.
Okay, Dan, not a very optimistic future. What do you think? The proposition is China is the same military strength as the United States. Go ahead.
Well, I would disagree with something you said in your introduction, which is that the United States is unilateral power today. I think we live today in a world of multilateral power. I think we're in a kind of pre-1914 moment where you have several great powers. Certainly the United States has been the dominant superpower, but if you look right now at any place in the world, you can see, for example, that Russia can be a check to U.S. power in one place. In other areas,
well,
you see challenges to the United States.
Look what about Iraq? That was very unilateralist.
Well, I don't think so at all. I think that we're seeing that there are other powers in the region that are, I mean, look at the whole, you can't just look at Iraq alone. You have to look at the whole Middle East.
Who's left in Iraq? Everybody left. Everybody left.
From other great powers and from the people of the Middle East, which is most important, the great challenge coming from below in society. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you were
All right, well,
why
don't we stay with China? What would the world be like if China were on par militarily with the United States? This topic of the program.
Well, I think I agree to a good extent with what Lynn said. That is, we have a world of multilateral competition, and we see many powers that are competing for the world's resources. That is, this is something like a return to the great empires in the pre-World War I period. And I think the likelihood is the development of world alliances. In my own view, the question is, will the United States and China have a kind of transition such as we saw in the past when Great Britain ceased to be the dominant power and there was an elision of power from Great Britain to the United States? Will we see something like what happened when Holland was the great power, but how Holland shared power with England, and later England will the United States? Will the coincidence of economic interests lead to a kind of U.S.-Chinese alliance that would then dominate the world? And if so, would the world's people be able to challenge such great powers? And how would they do that?
Okay. Lianchao, how likely do you think that is? It seems to me extremely unlikely that would be a scenario.
I think, yeah, first of all, I think America is still the dominant military power in the world. Even China, I think, becomes superpower. I agree that the clash between the rising new power and the existing power will be intensified. History has told us that this always happened. More likely, it's going to happen again. And the most recent example is the U.S. and Soviet Union in Cold War, and the world ended up in a more dangerous position. So I think China and also Chinese dream is the party state imperial dream. And the party state only cares about their own interests. They're maintaining expanding power. They don't put the well-being of the world first. They put their own interest first. So that will cause lots of clashes. And also, I think if you look at what happened in the past, what China did and what China is doing now, domestically and internationally, you can see they will do more harm than good in the future. And they're still bullying the people, bullying the neighbors, and in the maritime disputes, and they still occupy Tibet. Things like that, I think China, the clash will destabilize the world, will cause lots of turmoil in the future.
Okay, Lynn, it sounds like we just heard a reflection of the. Let's go to Lynn first. You know, the United States is preeminent, and it doesn't want to give up power. It sounds like what China wants.
First off, every country looks out for its own interests. This is not to excuse China's aggression, or I mean, every country must look out for its own self-interest. So let's look at Africa. The United States have troops in 35 countries over there, but China is Africa's biggest trading partner. Right. So it has a lot invested over there. In the last decade, 1 million Chinese have moved to Africa. Some of them are living there illegally. So there's a lot of money, and Chinese money in Africa. So sooner or later, we have to protect its investment, its money, and its people living there. The United States action in Libya, for example, was to push China out of the way.
Exactly.
The U.S. will use the pretext of the war against terrorism to protect its economic interests and to bump China out of the way. So at some point, China will have to respond militarily. So that's another flashpoint, that you might see Chinese troops in Africa, to protect what it has in Africa.
Okay, Dan, and those Chinese troops might be invited to Africa as well.
Well, of course, when troops are invited, it's very often because of the growing economic power. And I agree with what's just been said. You see Chinese investment not only in Africa, but also in Latin America, which is really an area that has historically been part of the U.S. Sphere of interest. No doubt also China is, of course, a neighbor on the edge of Russia. So there could be challenges between Russia and China because of the growing power of China, though it happens that at the moment there are naval exercises taking place between the two.
The largest ever.
But I don't think you can look at any one moment. I was going to say that going back to an earlier point that said the rising power always challenges the old power, I think that's just not true. When the United States was the rising power of the 1890s, challenging England's domination of the world, including driving England out of Central America.
But Dan, there's that phrase, Anglo-Saxon. Anglo-Saxon. We're talking about the same culture here. This is why it's very different. Lianchao, go ahead, jump in Washington.
It's not just economics. I think China has much more ambition, much bigger ambition in this world. You know, in the past, in the 50s and 60s, China is competing the dominance of the third world with the Soviet Union, and China still want to dominate the world, and that's their dream. And I think because the ideology, it's still ideology. You know, even we talk about the universal value and stuff like that. Chinese recognize that the discourse framework is not in their favor. They try to create a new discourse, which is to use socialist ideology as the so-called socialist core values to confront, to compete against the universal value. I think that's clearly indicate China's ambition not only limited to the economic arena, it's certainly expand to political arena.
Lynn, you know, a lot of people do look to China, you know, for investment and things like that because they don't have a lot of extra baggage. The Americans always have baggage, human rights, et cetera, et cetera. It's attractive to a lot of other countries.
Yes, Peter. Yes, I think the left is some people in the left are romanticizing China a bit too much. They are extolling China's soft power is charm offensive in contrast to America's militarism. But down the line, China may just prove itself to be as much of a bully as America right now. It's just not in position yet to be belligerent. But look at what's happening in the South China Sea. And I want to disagree with you slightly too, Peter, about the cultural factor. This won't be a kind of a Pan-Asian formation against the West, because China is pushing the Philippines and Vietnam and Japan around. So it's not, it's not going to war against the West. It's fighting for its own survival, for its own interests. So China is establishing a strong alliance with Russia, for example, which is not a cultural alliance, but because together they form a very formidable bloc, because China can use Russian oil and Russian natural gas as a kind of leverage, and Russia can use Chinese money. So, Russia has a lot of leverage over Europe, because much of Europe depends on...
Gentlemen, I need to jump in here. Lynn, I have to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on China. Stay with our team. Okay, Dan, if I can go back to you in Cincinnati. I mean, we've talked a lot about confrontation and differences, but what about the economies that are they're interdependent, the U.S. and China? I mean, how do we balance this?
Well, I think, again, this is part of the argument that I've been trying to make here. That is, why did England and the United States become allies? It wasn't because they were just of their language or culture. It was because of the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of British capital invested in the U.S. economy. And so you see that the U.S. has become a big investor in China. People think, of course, of Boeing and Walmart and other companies that have been there for a long time. But I think that the question is, obviously, whether there's kind of a balance. Can those lead to the linkages of economies and lead, therefore, to political alliances as people defend their economic interests, or will they lead to the divergence of those countries because of competing economic interests, which have also to do with the fact that these become imperial powers? It seems to me that's the kind of the question before us. And I can really see this. I find it odd that people don't see the possibility of a U.S.-Chinese alliance, given that Mao Zedong and Richard Nixon embraced and created an alliance that lasted for a quarter of a century or so. That's pretty good evidence that you can have cross-cultural alliances based on shared, in that case, more shared political interests. In a world of imperialism where great powers are always rivaling each other. Okay,
Lianchao, do you think the United States and China can find equal ground in the Middle East, for example? That's America's backyard. That's America's backyard.
That's American backyard. But China has already had this strategy called March West. And they're going to go from the west, China's Xinjiang province, Tibet, towards Middle East. That's their long-term strategy, a grand strategy, so-called. But they're still debating on that strategy. I think China's interests, American interests are at odds. They're very different. China clearly wants to have a socialist socialist ideology with the Chinese characteristics. And that certainly put them into the ideology war, almost like Cold War. And I don't see how you can
what kind of socialism is this?
Compromise that.
Okay, Lynn,
well, they made it clear.
What kind of socialism are you talking about?
Let me tell you, the socialism, if you read Hu Jintao's political report, made it clear that guiding principle, guiding ideology of Marxism, that's number one. The common idea of socialist ideology, number two. And the patriotism, number three.
But
and
this is a state that is a tremendous
socialist
exploiter of workers, violating workers' rights.
Well, I don't think...
How can you call yourself socialist when you
All right,
violate
gentlemen, I don't think most
rights?
people think of China as being very communist anymore. Let me go to Lynn. Okay, Lynn, what we just heard here is that the West is uncompromising. China is uncompromising. This is what we're hearing. Go ahead, Lynn. Go ahead in Philadelphia.
Well, I agree that conflict is inevitable because it's already happening. The U.S. has the Pacific pivot. So if China is marching west, the U.S. is already surrounding China. The U.S. doesn't really have a long-term economic strategy. It has a military strategy to protect its declining empire. That's why it had troops all over the place to protect the petrodollar, and it has sabotaged Chinese investment in several places already. So you already have them, subverting each other. So, like I said, this will only intensify. And the U.S. is enjoying its status at the moment because of the petrodollar, because of its military defense of the petrodollar. And China is already trying to bypass that by establishing trades with countries, including U.S. allies, in their own currencies. Okay, so the U.S. is living a kind of an illusion right now.
Peter, can I
particularly
jump in?
Iraq.
Peter,
go ahead.
Can I jump in?
Lianchao, go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick point because China's, in order for the U.S. and China to coexist, U.S. has to, first of all, recognize China as the superpower, great power status. That's number one. Number two, U.S. must respect China's so-called core interests. These core interests are very ever-growing, changing. And what they really want is their territory, so-called territory integrity. They want the South China Sea territory. They want East China Sea territory. They want Taiwan. If America do not agree, do not respect that type of core interests, that clearly will cause clash. There won't be a coexistence between the United States and China.
Dan, in Cincinnati, do you want to react to that? No compromise.
Well, I think that, once again, I don't think that, great powers make compromises all the time. They compromise in the short term to achieve a short-term goal. The United States and China have reached, or have had for some time, did have anyway, a modus vivendi regarding the China's core territorial interests. That is, things were more or less let to stand pat. I think the question is, what would exacerbate these conflicts? Clearly, the United States is going to try to strengthen its interests in Asia and strengthen other powers in Asia, and China is going to put pressure on them, as has already been mentioned. I don't see these compromises as being long-standing. This is a thieves' den. These imperial powers this is a den of thieves, all of them. The European powers, the European Union, Russia, China, the United States. And the thieves' den, it's a question of shrewdness, of strength, of ingenuity, and certainly all at the expense of the nations and peoples of the world, and at the expense of international human rights and universal values.
Okay, Lynn in Philadelphia.
Can I, Peter? Yeah, can I just add in?
Please do. Jump
Peter,
in. Go ahead.
Can I just jump in? Yeah, I think compromise is just temporary. That's what China is seeking now. The so-called build a new great power relations with the United States. They think that they can live together happily with the United States. But China has an old saying which says, two tigers cannot live on one mountain. That's China right now, it's a little cup. Of course, they won't fight against the United States, fight for that mountain. But eventually, they will become a big tiger, and the mountain will be too small for them. The even Pacific Ocean will be too small for them.
Okay, Lynn, you pointed out, the United States is a military...
I want to add something.
Lynn, go ahead, jump in.
Yes. Yeah, I just want to say what will exacerbate this problem also is that Chinese growth, the growth in China, economic growth in the last few years, the insane growth that they've been enjoying is unsustainable. Globally, countries everywhere are in trouble. They are indebted and unemployment is up, living standards down. So the expectation for the future will be disappointed. So many countries will be disappointed about their future prospects. So that will intensify this scramble for the remaining resources. So just to survive and just to placate their populations, we will see more conflicts, and not just between China and USA.
Okay, Dan, it sounds like the preamble to the First World War and the Second World War.
Well, or to the First World War and the Great Depression. That is, I think that's very right. That is that these countries are now all integrated into one huge world capitalist economy. They must all, in that economy, struggle for resources, struggle for markets, struggle to dominate nations where they can exploit the labor of those nations. And almost all of them, as they invest abroad, I think every single one of them, as they invest abroad, carry their idea of creating the export zones where they can exploit people for low wages and take advantage of low wages in poorer countries and so on. So I think, but in this world capitalist economy, as we know, there are ups and downs. There are certainly the regular business cycle of depression that is now back to about every 5 years and never recovering from the previous depression. And then people have also talked about the idea of the long wave cycles of 50 years. I don't know if that theory has real weight or not, but in any case, we know that these build up periodically to really deep world depressions. We might be right now still, the 2008 depression has not been overcome. So I think that what we may actually be seeing is China drawn into the maelstrom of this economic crisis.
Gentlemen, I want to ask all of you, because we're running out of time here, which country will prevail? Lin first in Philadelphia.
I think China, for the short run, is in better shape because it still had a manufacturing base, and it is doing practical things to improve itself, whereas the U.S. has no economic vision to speak of.
Okay. Lianchao in Washington, D.C., who will prevail?
I think...
well, that's what people want to know.
That's
what people want to know, okay? That's really what people want to know. Who's going to win? Go ahead.
Yeah. I think the market will win in the end because China has so much problem domestically. Any random event will cause collapse from the within because they create so much tension within the party, within the people in the party, within the ethnic groups. So any can reach tipping point at any moment. I think that's domestic issues will cause them collapse. If they fight against Japan and Taiwan, that will truly reveal their nature and will be isolated by international community.
Okay.
I think that will cause
We've almost run out of time,
decline.
and I want to give Dan the last word. Who will prevail? Over whom?
Well, I think we're looking at a possibility where no one wins, and the losers are the world's people as we head to economic crisis, military conflict, and a terrible environmental disaster that none of these nations are facing up to.
Okay, not particularly optimistic.
We need to see a movement in the world to reject all of these states.
We had 3 different points of view, and that was an accomplishment for this program. Many thanks today to my guests in Washington, Cincinnati, and in Philadelphia. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules. I love it.